Let me tell you how I burned my entire life down with a single, supposedly hilarious punchline. It's not even a dramatic story. It's just a stupid one, and I'm the idiot at the center of it, the one who lit the match and then acted surprised when the whole house went up in flames. His name was Elijah. He was, and I have to use the past tense now, which feels like swallowing glass, the best thing that ever happened to me. I think I still love him in that useless, hollowed out way you love a memory that can now only cause you pain. And I'm the one who pushed him away. Not with a big, cinematic fight or by cheating or any of the reasons that would at least make for a good story. No, I did it with a joke. The truly pathetic part? I can't even recall the exact phrasing I used anymore. My brain, in a rare act of kindness, has apparently decided to shield me from the full, unedited cringe of my own voice. It's all a blur of cheap champagne and my own desperate need to be clever, but I remember the silence that followed. God, I remember that. It wasn't just a lack of noise, it was a physical thing. It'd wait, it pressed down on my shoulders, filled my lungs, and sucked all the air out of the room. It was the sound of everything ending all at once. So here I am, I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm just trying to dissect the moment. An emotional autopsy. Maybe if I can pinpoint the exact cause of death, I can finally understand how I became the sole occupant of this ghost-filled apartment. We had been together for 3 years, 3 solid, happy, uncomplicated years. Elijah wasn't flashy, he was foundational. He was the kind of man who built things quietly and meticulously with his own 2 hands. He'd started his own logistics company from scratch, from a single beat-up van and a business plan scribbled on a napkin during his lunch break at a dead-end job. I remember him telling me the story on our third date, his eyes lit with a fire I'd never seen in anyone before. He spoke of sleeping in that van for 2 weeks to save on rent, of the bone-deep chill of the vinyl seats in winter, and the overwhelming, tear-inducing relief when he signed his first real client. Now his company was a thriving enterprise with dozens of employees and a fleet of modern trucks. But he never acted like a big shot. He still wore the same faded Carhartt jacket he'd had for a decade and talked about that first freight contract with more reverence than he ever did about the company's quarterly earnings. That journey, that brutal, beautiful struggle from the ground up, wasn't just a story he told, it was the bedrock of his identity. He wasn't proud of being rich. He was proud of having earned it, of having built something real and lasting out of pure grit. That was his core, his unshakable principle, and I, in my infinite stupidity, failed to understand it was also his most vulnerable point. For most of our relationship, I cherished that about him. His steadfastness was my anchor. He was the calm, steady shore to my often turbulent sea. But then 6 months ago, I landed a new job. A coveted position in the marketing department of a chic, fast-growing tech firm, and with the job came Zara. Zara was my new boss, the director of marketing, and the undisputed sun around which our entire department orbited. She was sharp, beautiful, and wielded sarcasm like a finely honed weapon. Her inner circle, which I desperately wanted to join, communicated almost exclusively through a language of ironic detachment and brutal, witty takedowns. At our team lunches, they dissect other people's lives, relationships, and fashion choices with the casual cruelty of bored gods. They were a pack of cool, polished predators, and they found everything and everyone a little bit amusing, a little bit basic. Elijah to them was a curiosity. He's so earnest, Zara once commented after meeting him briefly at a company happy hour, drawing out the word as if it were a synonym for terminally dull. Another time, a colleague, seeing a picture of Elijah and me on a camping trip on my desk, smirked and said, "God, how refreshingly wholesome." It wasn't overt cruelty. It was a constant, subtle erosion. They were connoisseurs of cynicism, and Elijah's genuine, unironic goodness was like a foreign dish they couldn't quite stomach. And I, like a fool, started to see him through their lens. I began to feel a creeping sense of inadequacy. I stopped telling stories at work about our quiet weekends. When they asked what Elijah did, I started emphasizing the company's success, the numbers, not the story of the van. I was tailoring him, editing him down into a version I thought they would find more impressive. His integrity began to feel like naivety, his stability started to feel boring. I was so consumed by the pressure to be accepted by Zara's glossy, brittle world that I started to believe that my own life, my own partner, needed to be repackaged with a sharper, more cynical edge. I needed to prove that I wasn't wholesome. I needed to prove I was one of them. The event was his 30th birthday party. It was supposed to be his night, a celebration of everything he'd built. He'd rented out the back room of a warm, rustic brewery, his favorite kind of place, all exposed brick and the smell of hops. He'd invited everyone. His parents, his siblings, his childhood friends who had known him when he was just a lanky kid with big dreams, and his loyal first employees who had stuck with him through the lame years. And then there were my guests, Zara and her clique looking sleek and slightly out of place like a flock of exotic birds in a field of sparrows. The atmosphere was genuinely joyful. People were sharing heartfelt, funny stories about Elijah. His best man, a burly guy named Sam, told a hilarious story about them trying to fix that first van with duct tape and a prayer. His mom tearfully recounted how he'd used his first big paycheck to pay off her mortgage. It was a tapestry of love and respect, woven from years of shared history. I watched Zara and her friends who were huddled by the bar, smirking and whispering to each other. I felt a hot flush of shame, followed by an even hotter, more toxic desire to impress them. Then Sam, acting as an impromptu MC, announced a toast. All right, everyone, let's go around. Say one thing you love most about the birthday boy. It was sweet. People shouted out things like his loyalty, his terrible dad jokes, his generosity. When it was my turn, every eye in the room was on me. I felt Zara's gaze like a spotlight. This was my moment, my audition. I could have said a million things. I could have talked about the way he hummed off-key while making coffee in the morning, or how he'd once driven 3 hours in a snowstorm just to bring me soup when I was sick. Instead, a different, uglier script took over. I stood up, held my glass, and smiled a bright, false smile. The smile I'd practiced in the mirror, the one I thought made me look witty and detached. What's the sexiest thing about Elijah? I began, my voice loud and performative. Oh, that's easy. I paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang in the air. I glanced at Zara, who was watching with a hungry, expectant grin. It's his bank account. The punchline landed, but not in the way I'd intended. Zara's circle erupted in loud, braying laughter that sounded obscene in the suddenly quiet room. It was the only sound. Everyone else, his mother, his father, his friends, the people who truly knew and loved him, just stared. The warm, happy energy of the room didn't just fade, it shattered. But the only face I truly saw was Elijah's. He wasn't angry, he wasn't yelling, there was no dramatic confrontation. The smile just vanished from his face, as if a switch had been flipped. His eyes, which had been sparkling with happiness moments before, became flat and empty. He looked at me, but it was like he was looking straight through me, at a stranger he'd never met before. In that one devastating second, I knew I hadn't just told a bad joke. I had taken the very core of his being, his hard-won journey, and reduced it to a cheap, cynical transaction. I had held up his soul and told the world it was for sale. The party died a slow, awkward death after that. People made their excuses, offering stilted goodbyes. The laughter and warmth were replaced by a thick, suffocating politeness. My own colleagues, including Zara, gave me a quick, almost pitying pat on the shoulder before making a swift exit, as if my social implosion was contagious. They had gotten their little show and now they were done. The car ride home was a masterclass in silence. It wasn't an angry silence which I could have dealt with. It was a dead silence, the kind that follows a fatal accident. Elijah drove with both hands on the wheel, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the road. He didn't look at me once. I tried to fill the void, my voice sounding shrill and desperate in the small space. Eli, it was just a joke. You know how they are. It's just their sense of humor. It's dark, you know. I didn't mean it. He didn't respond. Not a nod, not a hum, nothing. It was like talking to a statue. When we got back to our apartment, the one we had spent a year lovingly decorating together, he walked in, placed his keys on the small wooden dish by the door, and turned to face me. His expression was one of profound, weary finality. I can't be with someone who sees me like that, Ava, he said. His voice was unnervingly calm, stripped of all emotion. It was the voice you use with a customer service representative, not the person you share your bed with. I can't build a life with a person who thinks my worth is a number in an account. We're done. Done? What are you talking about? It was a stupid joke at a party. My panic was rising, clawing at my throat. You can't just end 3 years over a joke. It wasn't a joke, he said, and for the first time, a flicker of something, not anger, but a deep, cavernous hurt showed in his eyes. It was the truth, your truth. You said it because you wanted to impress them, and you used me to do it. You stood in a room full of people who love me, and you sold me out for a laugh from people you barely know. He shook his head, a small, final gesture of dismissal. Then he walked into our bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag from the top of the closet, and began packing. Not everything. Just the essentials, a few changes of clothes, his toothbrush, his laptop. The movements were efficient, decisive. There was no hesitation. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Within half an hour, he was at the door. I was sobbing by then, a messy, incoherent wreck, begging him to stay, promising I'd never see Zara again. He just looked at me with that same empty, distant expression. Goodbye, Ava. And then he was gone. The click of the lock echoed in the silent apartment. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling to call him, to text him, to unleash a torrent of apologies and pleas. But his name was gone from my contacts. His profile picture on WhatsApp was a blank gray silhouette. His Instagram and Facebook pages gone, he hadn't just walked out the door. He had surgically excised me from his digital life with a speed and precision that left me breathless. It was a cold, clean cut. No arguments, no screaming matches, no chance for reconciliation. Just a void. In a daze, I texted Zara. He left me, he actually broke up with me. Her reply came back a minute later. OMG, babe, that's insane. He's totally overreacting. Men are so dramatic, give him a few days, he'll come crawling back. And for a little while, clinging to that flimsy thread of validation, I believed her. I told myself he was being dramatic. I told myself he'd cool off and realize how ridiculous he was being. I spent the first night alternating between righteous indignation and annoying, sickening dread. A few days passed, then a week. The crawling back never happened. The silence from Elijah's end was absolute, a digital brick wall so total it felt like a physical presence in the apartment. My initial denial, propped up by Zara's casual dismissal, began to crumble, its flimsy foundation giving way to a frantic, rising panic. This wasn't him being dramatic. This was him being gone, this was real. I started reaching out to our mutual friends, the people who had been at the party, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through my contacts. My calls and texts were met with a new, excruciating kind of social awkwardness. Sam, Elijah's best man, finally answered on my third try. His voice, usually so warm and booming, was strained and distant. Hey, Ava. Sam, thank God, have you heard from him? Is he okay? Can you please just tell him to call me? I need to talk to him, I pleaded, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, choosing his words carefully. Look, Ava, I think you should just give him some space, he's going through it. Space, Sam, he broke up with me over a joke, he won't even talk to me. This is insane. Yeah, he said, and the single word was a judgment. It was quiet, but it was damning. It wasn't a great joke, Ava. Then the inevitable retreat. Listen, I gotta go, I'm in the middle of something. He wasn't. I could hear the sterile quiet of his office in the background. That was the first click of a door shutting in my face. It was the same with the others. I texted Maria, whose wedding we had danced at just last summer. My message, full of frantic apologies and pleas for information, was left on read for 6 hours before she replied with a curt, I don't think it's my place to get involved. I hope you're okay. It was a polite but firm deflection, a social force field I couldn't break through. They weren't being cruel, they were just closing ranks, protecting their own. And I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach, was no longer one of their own. At work, the dynamic shifted too. The story of my spectacular breakup became a brief, juicy piece of office gossip for Zara's clique. For a day or two, they treated me with a sort of fascinated pity, like watching a car crash in slow motion. Zara even put a hand on my arm and said, You'll be fine, sweetie. His loss, but it was performative sympathy, thin as onion skin. Their attention span was short. When it became clear there was no dramatic reconciliation on the horizon, no new chapter to the story, they lost interest. The lunch invitations became less frequent. The inside jokes continued, but I was on the outside of them again, listening in, smiling weakly when I was supposed to. I had performed my clown act, paid the price of admission with the most valuable thing in my life, and now the circus had moved on, leaving me behind in the sawdust. I wasn't one of them. I was just the sad girl in the corner cubicle whose boyfriend had dumped her. The very people I had tried so desperately to impress now looked at me with a faint, dismissive embarrassment, as if my failure was somehow staining their carefully curated image. I was a cautionary tale they'd tell at their next boozy brunch. 2 weeks after he left, I finally accepted he wasn't coming back. The apartment felt vast and silent, every object a monument to our shared life. His favorite coffee mug, the worn spot on the sofa where he always sat, the ridiculous thriller novel he was halfway through still on the nightstand, they were all accusing me. Unable to stand the quiet anymore, I decided to do something, anything, to feel a sense of control. I decided to clean. I started with his desk, a space I rarely touched. It was neat, organized, just like him. I wiped down the surface, rearranged the pens, and then on a whim, I pulled open the top drawer. It was mostly just old receipts and charging cables. But tucked away at the back, underneath a user manual for a printer we no longer owned, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a high-end, independent jewelry store downtown, the kind of place you go for something special, not for a casual purchase. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. The item description was for a custom engraved bracelet, and below it in the notes section was the engraving text. A set of geographic coordinates. I didn't need to look them up, I knew them by heart. It was the exact spot on the coast where we'd had our first date, a windswept cliffside where we watched the sunset and talked for hours. The date on the receipt was from the week before his birthday, and the scheduled pickup date, printed in bold, was for the day after the party. The air left my lungs in a single, ragged gasp. I sank to the floor, the receipt clutched in my hand, the paper crinkling against my sweaty palm. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, gut-wrenching clarity. While I was busy plotting how to perform for a group of people who didn't matter, he was planning this. He was preparing to give me a gift that was the complete antithesis of the joke I made. It wasn't about money or status, it was about us. It was about a memory, a moment in time that was ours alone, forged long before his bank account had any extra zeros in it. And on the very night he was celebrating the milestone of his life's work, the night before he was going to give me this incredibly personal, meaningful gift, I stood up in front of everyone he loved and respected, and I shamed him for the one thing he was most proud of. I had taken his heart, offered on a silver platter, and spat on it. That was the moment the last of my self-delusion shattered. I wasn't the wronged party. I wasn't the victim of his overreaction. I was the villain of this story, a cheap, pathetic wannabe clown. Now this is my life, the nights are the worst. I sit here in the dark, the blue light of my phone illuminating my face. I've created a fake Instagram account, a ghost profile with no name and no followers. It's my private window into hell. I watch his life move on without me. He hasn't posted anything dramatic. There's no new girl, no vengeful declarations. It's almost worse. There are pictures of him hiking with Sam, a blurry photo from a family barbecue, a shot of a sunset over a lake. His world is still turning. It's quiet, it's normal, it's steady, he's healing. He's returning to the man he was before he met me, and me, I'm stuck here. A social media stalker in the ruins of a life I built and then demolished. Every photo is a fresh stab. Every happy, smiling picture of him with his friends is a reminder of the world I threw away. I'm the clown sitting alone in the empty, dark tent after the show is over, replaying my one disastrous punchline over and over and over again.